What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. There's been some accusations put on me that we have to dispel on tonight's episode. It's been said that I'm a SEC homer, I'm a SEC shill. Greg Sankey and the SEC have me on their payroll since all I do is make content, gassing up the SEC and hate on the Big 10. So I'm here to put an end to these false accusations. We're going to break down how Ohio State helped the Big 10 close the gap with the SEC, why last year might not have been the peak for Indiana, and then we got to dive into my favorite conference to talk about. We can't have an episode of the JT Sports Podcast without talking about the SEC. We're going to touch on the lie about Alabama's downfall, and I'll prove why this is a lie. The big move that Texas made that will win them the national championship this offseason, and it's not Archman, and it's not somebody that they picked up from the transfer portal. And I was doing some thinking last night, and I figured out why Florida State has yet to fire Mike Norvell. And the answer isn't what a lot of y'all think it is. It's not because Florida State is broke. They definitely have the money. There's a reason why Mike Norvell is still employed down there in Tallahassee. And then I'm going to reveal the 10 breakout players that college football is not ready for. If you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football, I got great news for you. You have arrived at the right place. We're talking all things football, NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you're a diehard football fan, you can't go a day without getting your football fix in. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find this episode along with all of our previous ones in audio format on all podcasting platforms. We are trying to crack the top 100 of the football podcast charts on Apple. The only way we can make that happen is with your help. So if you enjoy the content, you want to support the grind, give the JT Sports Podcast a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. The links are down in the description below. And let's dive into it. Alabama's downfall is a lie. The talent is still there. The recruiting is still elite. Kalen DeBoer has already proven that he can keep Alabama in the national championship conversation, even with a flawed team. You see, the problem with Alabama right now is not that they've fallen off. It's not that Kalen DeBoer is in over his head. He's going to get fired 3-4 years from now. The problem with Alabama is that people are judging Alabama by the Nick Saban standard, even though Nick Saban isn't at Alabama anymore. The Alabama standard is different from the Nick Saban standard, but the two oftentimes get confused when the Nick Saban standard is a standard that no other coach, no other program will ever be able to live up to. Hell, even if Nick Saban was coaching right now, I don't even think he would have been able to live up to the standard that he created at Alabama. The perception that Alabama has fallen off stems from the misconceptions that Alabama has gotten away from what used to be the standard, which was winning national championships every year, being a dynasty. And that's a standard that Alabama wasn't going to be able to live up to under Kalen DeBoer, and no other program will be able to live up to that standard that Nick Saban created. That's the standard that is once in a lifetime. You will never see another program become what Alabama was during what they were at their heights under Coach Saban. There's a reason why Nick Saban is considered the greatest head coach to ever compete in this sport. Kalen DeBoer, though, was not handed a perfect situation. It's believed that Kalen DeBoer was left the keys to the Corvette and he wrecked the thing. That's not what happened. Nick Saban didn't leave Kalen DeBoer with a perfect situation. People forget how flawed Alabama was their final 2 years under Nick Saban. Those last two Alabama teams that Nick Saban coached was some of the worst Alabama teams that Saban put on the field at Tuscaloosa since his first season on the job. Nick Saban, going into his final season at Alabama, he cleaned house with his entire coaching staff. He said that we were too Bryce Young dependent. Alabama, the same issues that they had under Nick Saban in his final 2 years were the same issues that have plagued Alabama their first 2 years under Kalen DeBoer. Their offensive line wasn't that good. They weren't that dominant on the line of scrimmage as what they used to be under Coach Saban. And just overall, the way that Alabama was winning games was not the same way that they used to win games in the peak of the Alabama dynasty. Alabama used to blow out nearly every team that they played. During the final 2 years of Nick Saban, however, though, it took them a prayer and Jordan Hare to beat Auburn. Remember before Nick Saban's final SEC championship game, how Jalen Milroe had to throw a prayer to Isaiah Bond on 4th and 20 to beat Auburn in the Iron Bowl, despite Alabama being the better of the two teams. Like, there were a bunch of close games that Alabama could have lost that they ended up lucking up and winning in Nick Saban's final season. When Alabama beat Georgia in Nick Saban and Kirby Smart's last ever SEC championship game, Georgia was favored to win that game. There's a reason why Nick Saban's last season at Alabama was his best head coaching job ever, because the team, despite how flawed it was, improved every single week. And the version of Alabama that we saw and Nick Saban's final game was better than the version of Alabama we saw to begin his final season. Alabama went to the SEC championship game, won a college playoff game, in spite of how flawed last year's team was, which tells you that the floor for Alabama is still higher than the majority of other teams' floors are in this sport. If you can still make it to your conference championship game, win a playoff game despite having no run game, a flawed offensive line, not being that good on the defensive line, you're still a pretty damn good program. You are still a very good head coach. Last year proved that Alabama's floor is still elite. They were still a flawed team, made it to the conference title game, won a playoff game, and somehow they're on the decline. They're falling off. Some folks in the media look at the flaws that Alabama was able to overcome and view it as a foreshadowing of how bad things are about to become for Kalen DeBoer. I look at the flaws that Alabama overcame last year and view it as the best is about to arrive. Because you see, the first 2 years that Kalen DeBoer has coached at Alabama, there's been a lot of growing pains. Nick Saban had growing pains his first 2 years at Alabama. Remember when he lost to the University of Louisiana Monroe in year one? This was not the perfect program that Kalen DeBoer was taking over from Nick Saban as what it's believed to have been. There were some flaws that had plagued Alabama the first 2 years under Kalen DeBoer, that plagued Alabama their last 2 years under Nick Saban. Alabama is not falling off, though. If you can be a flawed team, still win 11 games, that tells me that your program is still strong. Kalen DeBoer, the biggest question mark about him when he took the Alabama job, when he was replacing Nick Saban, was how well was he going to recruit? Was he going to be able to recruit the South as good as what Nick Saban has? Well, Alabama's recruiting has not dropped off. You're saying that Alabama has fallen off, but the recruiting hasn't fallen off. Alabama's recruiting is still as strong as what it was under Nick Saban. They have had a top 3 recruiting class for going on 7 straight years now, the longest active streak in college football when it comes to finishing with top 3 recruiting classes. The last 2 recruiting classes that Kalen DeBoer has brought in, he's had several impact true freshmen like Dejon Lee, Xavier Brown. Both those guys are outstanding corners who are very good in their true freshman campaigns. What about what Ryan Williams did in his true freshman season? The talent that Kalen DeBoer is bringing in is only getting better. And the win in college football, they say it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and Joes. So if Alabama's falling off, how is it that they still have some of the most talented rosters in college football? How is it that Alabama is still out recruiting 98% of college football, but they're falling off though, right? You see, Kalen DeBoer has Alabama in the perfect situation. Alabama right now has never been more disrespected, more underestimated going into a season than what they are going into this year. I feel like Kalen DeBoer, the only thing he had to address this offseason was fixing the issues that Alabama has had on the lines of scrimmage. One thing that I will use as a knock against Kalen DeBoer is, in spite of Alabama's lines of scrimmage not being that dominant in Nick Saban's final 2 years, they didn't get pushed around as much as how Alabama has under Kalen DeBoer on the line of scrimmage. It just feels like Alabama has a West Coast feel on the line of scrimmage under Kalen DeBoer, and he addressed that issue in the transfer portal this cycle. He brought in 17 transfers. 11 out of 17 of those transfers are on the line of scrimmage. Offensive linemen, defensive linemen. He also brought in a new offensive line coach. Now, why am I giving Kalen DeBoer the benefit of the doubt? It's the fact that Kalen DeBoer is one of the most winningest coaches in all of FBS over the past 5 years. This dude has one of the best records against ranked opponents in all of college football, second behind Kirby Smart. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere that he's been. He won at Alabama last year. You got people asking, what did Alabama win last year? A playoff game? Did we forget about that? Did we forget that Alabama beat Oklahoma in the first round of playoffs? Did we forget that Alabama earned the right to play for the SEC championship game? What did Alabama win? A playoff game? A shot for the SEC title? Why are we treating last season as if Alabama didn't do anything at all? Just because you may disagree with Alabama getting into the playoffs still doesn't diminish what they accomplished last year. It's just so weird how we just selectively choose which team seasons we honor and don't honor. Alabama made it to the flipping playoffs. They won a playoff game. If you go Google the college football playoff first round results, you will see that Alabama went to Norman and beat Oklahoma despite the public being heavy on Oklahoma in that game. But Alabama hasn't won anything though. No, the problem is that Alabama isn't winning like what they used to during the peak of the Nick Saban dynasty. And once again, people are misguided about Alabama's downfall because you're holding them to a standard that they will never be able to reach ever again, and no other program in college football will be able to reach. The Nick Saban standard is not the Alabama standard. It is what it's called, the Nick Saban standard. The standard you have for Alabama was built by Nick Saban. He's not there no more. If we are saying that Alabama has fallen off, then Alabama fell off way before Nick Saban retired. When Alabama lost to Georgia in the national championship game, when Jamison Williams and John Mechie didn't play in it, that's the start of Alabama's downfall. If you're trying to push that narrative that Alabama is no longer what they used to be, Alabama's downfall started way before Kalen DeBoer became Alabama's head coach. Look at how Alabama was winning in their final 2 seasons under Nick Saban compared to how they used to win at the height of the Alabama dynasty under Nick Saban. The same issues that Nick Saban had in his final 2 years, not being that good on the line of scrimmage, not being able to have an effective run game, are the same issues that plagued Alabama their last 2 years under Kalen DeBoer. So if you're telling me that Alabama has truly fallen off, then the fall off started a few years ago before Kalen DeBoer took this job, before Nick Saban retired. But you can't say Alabama's fall off started in Nick Saban's final years, though, because it's Nick Saban, it's the GOAT. You have to leave his legacy unscathed. Nick Saban was this perfect coach, never had any flaws, always had perfect teams. Hindsight is always 20/20. If you go back and you look at how Alabama played and how they won a lot of their games in Nick Saban's final season, that was not the Alabama standard that everybody held them to. But you give them a pass because they won the SEC championship and they had a goal line stand that costed them a shot in the national championship when they lost to Michigan. So if we're saying that Alabama's standard has truly fallen, then the standard fell a few years before Kalen DeBoer took this job. When Nick Saban fired his entire coaching staff, said that we were too Bryce Young dependent, that's when you could have circled that for being the beginning of Alabama's downfall. But I just think that the biggest lie in college football going into this season is that Alabama has fallen off. They no longer are a factor. When they won a playoff game, they made it to the SEC championship, they still are maintaining the elite recruiting that they had under Nick Saban. Stop with the lies, man. Let's talk about the facts. And the facts still show that Alabama is here to stay. And they're only going to get better. Whew, y'all boys got me fired up tonight, man. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out to my guy Chisley7863. Shout out to everybody wherever you're watching, whether you're listening to this live on YouTube or you're listening to the replay after. Go ahead, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. You can find us at JT Sports _ on Instagram, X, TikTok. Send in your questions. Anything that you would like answered on a future episode, send it in the DMs. We also upload some bonus content. We upload clips from the show. We also keep you updated with everything that's going on with the show and the platform. So go ahead, follow us at JT Sports _ is where you can find us on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Some of you guys may think that I'm ODing, but I really believe that Florida State is setting Mike Norvell up to get fired this year. And maybe sabotage is too strong of a word to use, but when your roster is valued near the bottom of the ACC and you're only outspending more than Boston College and Pitt, according to Pete Nakos, that tells me that FSU, they are not invested in Mike Norvell anymore. It's not a Florida State is broke problem. It's a we don't fuck with Mike Norvell problem. Mike Norvell, after how bad things went with DJU in 2024 and how that team just completely fell off the map, the donors, the alumni, they just all lost confidence in Mike Norvell. And that's why they didn't give him more NIL money after the debacle. And even last year, sure, their roster wasn't as talented as it was when they won the ACC championship and got snubbed out of the playoffs, but the money that they put into last year's team wasn't as much as what they put into the team a few years ago when the program was on top and they were on the rise. They were climbing, or they kept climbing. That's what they love to use as their mantra. But once stuff started to hit the fan under Mike Norvell, the donors, the guys cutting the checks for FSU to get good players, they said, you know what? We don't believe in Mike Norvell anymore. So if I don't believe in you, what's the point of me giving you any of my money? You see, Florida State didn't fire Mike Norvell because they couldn't afford his buyout. Florida State didn't fire Mike Norvell because they couldn't find a definitive upgrade from him. Florida State went after Lane Kiffin. Florida State was the third team in the Lane Kiffin sweepstakes that we didn't know about until after when he revealed it. And if Florida State was involved in the Lane Kiffin sweepstakes, that means that they weren't broke. They had a competitive offer to at least get Lane Kiffin to consider taking the job. Now, it wasn't as much as what Florida and LSU were willing to pay him, but it wasn't too far off the ballpark. Not only did Florida State try to go after Lane Kiffin, but they also tried to go after James Franklin. But James Franklin turned down the Florida State job and chose Virginia Tech instead. So if Florida State was able to go after James Franklin and Lane Kiffin, if they were able to get one of those guys, they would have had to pay not only $100 million to get them and plus buy out Mike Norvell, but they also would have had to pay for a completely new team because James Franklin and Lane Kiffin, the conditions of them leaving their previous jobs, or James Franklin getting a new job and Lane Kiffin leaving for Ole Miss to join LSU, was due to the amount of resources they were going to have at their new universities. Lane Kiffin chose LSU over Ole Miss because they pretty much were giving him infinite resources every year. James Franklin took the Virginia Tech job because Virginia Tech promised him that they were going to be more committed to not just football, but sports in general, and they're going to be putting a lot of money into not just NIL, but also when it comes to upgrading the facilities. So if Florida State was willing to go after James Franklin and Lane Kiffin, that means that they're not broke. They have the money, because they weren't going to be able to hire those guys and be like, we don't got the money right now, but we'll pay you later. No. Florida State's reasoning for not firing Mike Norvell is that they're going with the assumption that, okay, if we really do have to fire this guy, if we're going to fire Mike Norvell and give him 50, 60 million in his pocket, then we might as well go out and spend that same amount of money to get his replacement, so we don't get asked out and find ourselves in this same situation 4 or 5 years down the road because we whiffed on another head coaching hire because we decided to be cheap. We couldn't afford to buy out Mike Norvell entirely, so we had to cheap out and just get low-hanging fruit to replace him. No, Florida State's mindset is, if we're going to pay all this money to fire Mike Norvell and buy him out, we're going to make sure that we get a definitive upgrade. We're going to make sure that we go big game hunting. So whoever replaces Mike Norvell is going to be a big-time hire. And I think that Mike Norvell's replacements are going to be one of these three coaches. It's either going to be Rhett Lashley, currently at SMU, Manny Diaz, who currently is coaching at Duke, who is a FSU alum, or it's going to be Dan Mullen, who already is familiar with the Florida recruiting landscape. He had a decent amount of success as a head coach at Florida. Florida State isn't going to buy out Mike Norvell unless they're able to get a proven, definitive, top-level head coach to replace him. And that's a smart way to go about it. Florida State, on the outside looking in, they appear to be broke because they didn't invest a lot into the past 2 years' team. But if you're a Florida State bag dropper, you're a donor, you're an alumni, why the hell are you going to drop any more money into this program when you have a head coach that you don't believe? Like, Florida State football has never looked more disinterested than what they currently do right now. Like, the fan base is not engaged at all. Like, I really question just how many Florida State fans are going to continue to show up to these games when things really start to hit the fan. And FSU is like 1-4, 1-6. Like, are fans still going to continue to show up? Probably not. Because not only are the alumni and the donors tired of Mike Norvell, but so is this fan base. So when you have a program right now that just doesn't have any juice, any momentum, nothing to feel optimistic about, why would anybody want to pour money into this program? These guys want Mike Norvell out of there. They don't want to keep him employed. They don't want to save him. They don't want to give him 15, 20 million to spend on the team to save his job. No, they want to replace this dude with a proven high-level head coach. And that's why Florida State, instead of spending all this money on this year's team, they're saving that money so they can go out and get a better replacement for Mike Norvell. Does that not make sense to some of y'all? Some of y'all may think I'm digging a little bit too deep into this, but based on what Florida State tried to replace Mike Norvell with last year, they said, we're not about to pay you 50, 60 million and just be replacing you with anybody. If we're going to fire you and we're going to have to be asked out of cash to do so, we're going to fire you, pay your buyout, and we're going to apply that same money and use it to get a big-time hire. I don't think Florida State's going to hire Glenn Schumann or some unknown coach out of the G5. Florida State's going to replace Mike Norvell with a big-name head coach that has a proven track record of winning. They have the money to do so. They are not as broke as what they're leading us on to believe. They just are selective with how they're using their money, and they're not going to use their money to support a coach that they don't fuck with. They don't rock with Mike Norvell anymore. It's pretty plain and simple to see. Like, nobody in Florida State's program right now has any optimism about this year or the future under Mike Norvell. So if you're not bought into the coach, you're not going to be willing to donate to the program. That's how it works. Florida State hasn't fired Mike Norvell because they're broke. They haven't fired him because they're waiting for the right big name to take that big money offer that they're going to give him. Florida State is going to end up giving whoever's the best head coaching candidate available this upcoming coaching carousel a Godfather offer. They're going to give them an offer that they can't refuse. They're going to say, we know we have to pay $50-60 million to buy out Mike Norvell and his staff. Don't worry about that. If we're going to spend all that money to get rid of him, we're going to spend just as much to make sure we get a definitive upgrade from Mike Norvell too, because Florida State has good facilities. I watched a Florida State facility tour. Their facilities are up to par with pretty much the majority of college football. It's not like they're a Power 4 program, Power 4 resources, Power 4 facilities. Hell, my former therapist was a FSU alum. He was a donor to the program, so he kind of gave me a little bit of some inside information on how it works. He was the one who told me they were going to fire Willie Taggart before anybody publicly really knew Willie Taggart was going to get fired, especially with how ugly that Boise State opener went. So Florida State donors, alumni, they're not broke. They're just not willing to invest into a program that has a head coach that's not worth investing to when you're already investing a lot of money to get rid of him. So if you're going to invest a lot of money to get rid of this dude, you're going to invest a lot of money to make sure you get a damn good replacement for him. So you don't have to spend even more money down the road whiffing on Mike Norvell and whiffing on whoever his replacement is, because his replacement is going to be the best money can buy. And I think even though it's a bad look for Florida State, it's a very smart tactical move on their behalf. The SEC is in jeopardy of getting fully lapped by the Big 10 this upcoming season. The Big 10 already has the argument for being the best conference in college football because the top teams in the Big 10 have been better than the top teams out of the SEC. The only real argument that the SEC still has for why they can still claim themselves as the best conference in college football right now is that they're the deeper conference than the Big 10. But this year, though, I feel like the Big 10's middle class could be strong enough that they could take that title away from the SEC too. Now it no longer is just going to be Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. Like, now you got USC, who Lincoln Riley just came out and said that he believes this program is finally good enough to compete for a national championship. Washington is on the rise. I feel like UCLA with Bob Chesney, they're on the rise. There are a lot of programs in the Big 10 that have been kind of stuck in the middle of the Big 10 that are on the rise. You can never overlook Iowa. Iowa eventually is going to win 10 games and get to the college football playoffs, even though they play zero offense. And how the Big 10 got to this point where they now are surpassing the SEC as college football's most dominant conference stems all the way back to when Ohio State first hired Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer brought the SEC blueprint to Ohio State in the Big 10. Before Urban Meyer got to Columbus, the Big 10 wasn't really built to match the SEC talent-wise or athletically. You see, before Urban Meyer became Ohio State's head coach, the Big 10 was just known for playing great defense, having very strong and physical run games, but a lot of the teams in the Big 10 weren't really that good on the perimeter. They didn't have great corners. They didn't have great receivers other than Ohio State. Ohio State has always been a wide receiver factory. Ohio State has been one of the few teams in the Big 10 that has always been kind of built like a SEC team. But once Urban Meyer got to Ohio State, based on what he did at Florida, with how much talent he was able to recruit at Florida, not just within the state, but in the states also close to Florida in the South, like Texas, Georgia, Urban Meyer knew that if he was able to come to Ohio State, recruit this part of the region, and also be able to bring in Southern recruits to come to Ohio State, he could make the most dominant program in the Big 10, and he could completely lap the conference. And that's what happened the first couple of years that Ohio State was being coached under Urban Meyer. There was a clear gap between Ohio State and the rest of the Big 10 because Ohio State, unlike the majority of the Big 10, they didn't just have good offensive linemen and good defensive linemen. They had great wide receivers. They had great quarterback play. Ohio State was built like a SEC team, while the rest of the Big 10 was just built like the old school traditional Big Ten teams. Think about what Wisconsin used to be at their peak. They always had great defenses. They had great running backs, but the receivers and the quarterbacks weren't really that great. What Wisconsin was during the mid-2010s was the embodiment for what the Big Ten was as a conference. Ohio State was a trailblazer. And once everybody started to realize what Ohio State was becoming because of the blueprint that Urban Meyer took from Florida to Ohio State, the rest of the Big Ten started quickly realizing that we got to start doing what Urban Meyer is doing, or we're never going to win a Big Ten championship. You might as well make Ohio State the de facto Big Ten champion before the season even starts with the juggernaut that Urban Meyer was turning that program into. So what did Urban Meyer's success at Ohio State force the rest of the Big Ten to have to do? They have to modernize. It's either you adapt or you just fall out of favor. So then you end up having Urban Meyer, who steps down and gets succeeded by Ryan Day. And that's really when the rest of the Big Ten kind of started to get the blueprint. That's when you now start to see more teams in the Big Ten put more effort into recruiting, put more effort into their resources, making sure that they have the ability to go cross country to scout some of these high school players in the South, on the West Coast. And now with the influx of Pac-12 teams that has joined the Big Ten, like Oregon, UCLA, USC, you are now starting to see the Big Ten as a conference overall recruit just as well as what the SEC has. Because before Urban Meyer got to Ohio State, the majority of the top 25 recruiting classes that you used to see were made up of teams from the SEC. There were only like maybe 2 or 3 Big Ten teams that were consistently recruiting top 25 classes. That was Ohio State, obviously, Michigan, and Penn State. When James Franklin got there, after Bill O'Brien stabilized the program somewhat. But what Ryan Day did, though, he took Urban Meyer's blueprint and he poured some more gasoline on it. I think that Ryan Day's recruiting is even far better than what it was under Urban Meyer, because Urban Meyer, sure, he was going into the South and taking some of the best recruits from that area, but Ryan Day has said, bump just taking some of the best recruits out of the South. We don't just need a Jeremiah Smith out of South Florida. We need to get some of the best players out of Texas, some of the best players out of Cali. So now you've seen Ryan Day make Ohio State an even bigger national recruiting powerhouse than what they were under Urban Meyer. And with the rest of the Big Ten seeing this, the rest of the Big Ten now has started to take that same approach. But with the transfer portal now at NIL, if you're not able to get some of these guys out of high school, you can get some of these guys later on 2-3 years down the road. Now you see the Big Ten has caught up to the SEC in terms of not just is their top better than the SEC, but possibly we could see the middle portions of the Big Ten be better than what the middle portions of the SEC have been these last couple of years, because now you have so many other programs that have taken the blueprint that Urban Meyer took from Florida and used it to build up Ohio State into what they are right now under Ryan Day. And with the help of NIL, it's making it more easier. Now you have that parity that we've all been asking for. I feel like Ohio State is still the best program in the Big Ten, but the gap that Ohio State used to have over the Big Ten when they first hired Urban Meyer is a lot smaller now, with how much more programs in the Big Ten are investing more seriously. And I think that with teams like Washington, USC, Michigan, Penn State about to make a resurgence, you're really going to see the Big Ten start to suffocate the SEC's argument for being the top conference in college football. Now, I still believe that the SEC still is king, because I don't think that you can judge who's the best conference solely by postseason success and how good the top teams are. I think depth of conference, regular season head-to-head matchups still matter, and in the regular season, the SEC had the best record against all Power 4 conferences. So I still believe the SEC is the top conference, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Big Ten completely trumped my argument and they surpassed SEC in depth, and that would be the last final straw that the SEC will have until they have to fully get on their knees and bow down to the Big Ten and put the crown on the Big Ten for being the best conference in college football. But the Big Ten has got to where they are today thanks to what Urban Meyer did when he first got to Ohio State with the blueprint that he brought with him from his success at Florida. Indiana just completed the greatest season in college football history. These guys went 16-0. We haven't had a team go 16-0 since Yale did it in 1894. Not only did Indiana go 16-0, of course they won a national championship, but they had a Heisman-winning quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, who went first overall in this past year's NFL draft. They had a bunch of other good players get drafted to the league as well. And now the question that we're asking about Indiana is the same question that we ask about every team after they win a national championship. Can they do it again? Can they go back-to-back this year? How many more national championships will Curt Cignetti win in the foreseeable future at Indiana? Will Curt Cignetti even win another national championship at Indiana? You see, I'm very terrified of Indiana because even though I feel like accomplishment-wise, last year was the peak, I don't think we'll see another team go 16-0 like that. From a talent standpoint, though, last year for Indiana was just the beginning of how dominant this program is about to be. What Curt Cignetti has done so early on into his Indiana tenure reminds me of what Nick Saban did early on into his Alabama tenure. When Nick Saban first got to Alabama, he had that 7-win season. It was a rebuilding season, but year two, you saw the massive jump that that program made, despite them still not recruiting at the level that they were once they hit their peak under Nick Saban. But they were able to hit on a few big-time true freshmen like Mark Ingram, Julio Jones. And then in year three, that's really when Nick Saban put his stamp on Alabama, and Alabama became the greatest dynasty in the history of college football. I feel like Curt Cignetti, although his path has been a lot different than how Nick Saban's path was when he first got to Alabama, he's had more instant gratification than what Nick Saban initially got at Alabama. I still feel like the blueprint is the same. When Curt Cignetti first got to Indiana, when he was trying to sell 5- and 4-star recruits on the vision that Indiana was going to be a national championship contender for years to come, recruits couldn't believe him. You mean to tell me that Indiana, a basketball school, one of the losest programs in all of college football, was going to be a national championship contender? Yeah, at first you laughed at it. You didn't believe it. You had to see it to believe it. And then you saw Curt Cignetti actually fulfill his promise. And the vision started to become a lot clearer. You saw Indiana make it to the college football playoffs in Curt Cignetti's first season. Then you were like, okay, but maybe that was a little bit of a fluke. You know, they had an easy schedule. When they played the two best teams in their schedule, Ohio State and Notre Dame, they got blasted. Then you saw what happened last year in Curt Cignetti's second year. You saw him win the national championship. So now if you're a recruit, Curt Cignetti just isn't selling dreams to you. What this guy's actually selling is actually reality. You want to win national championships, be coached up to have success at the next level in the NFL, get that generational bag, you go play for Curt Cignetti, which is why you're now starting to see Indiana get more blue chip recruits. I woke up the other day and I saw Indiana be in the mix for like one of the best receivers in this upcoming recruiting class. They're also getting a bunch of good portal additions. Like, they're getting guys out of the portal that they wouldn't have been able to get a few years ago when Curt Cignetti first got to Indiana. It's not just, oh, Indiana has Mark Cuban money. No, everybody has money if you are trying to be a national championship contender, but it's about how you spend that money. And if a lot of these guys are getting paid the same, then it really just comes down to which vision do you believe in more. And now it's a lot easier to believe in Curt Cignetti's vision if you're a 5- or 4-star recruit, because the proof is already there. The proof of concept has already proved that it's worked. So if Indiana was able to go 16-0, be the most efficient team in the history of college football, have a top 5 defense, a top 5 offense, one of the most least penalized teams in America, have one of the highest turnover margins in college football, imagine what Curt Cignetti's going to do when he starts to get his hands on the same caliber of recruits that Ohio State and Oregon have been able to get their hands on. And Indiana and Curt Cignetti were able to beat those teams in spite of having a roster that didn't have as much blue chip talent as what Ohio State and Oregon did. What made Indiana so special last year is that that team was as good as what it was because of the experience that they had. It wasn't more so they weren't talented. I'm not trying to say that they weren't talented, but I'm just saying that I felt like the experience and the coaching elevated the team more. In the foreseeable future, it's not going to come down to that. It's going to be because Indiana has elite coaching and they also have that elite talent, because when you win and your proof of concept is proven to work, it's easier to sell guys that vision because now they know that it works. So now Indiana, with the types of recruits that they are now about to get, last year's team may have been the peak in terms of performance and efficiency, but in terms of talent, I feel Indiana's going to have several teams over these next 4 or 5 years that are going to be more talented than what their national championship squad was. And I know that talent doesn't always win championships, but let's not act like college football still isn't about the X's and O's. It's still about the Jimmies and Joes. It's just that the Jimmies and Joes that Indiana had that looked like 2-star, 3-star guys on paper actually turned into 4, 5-star guys once Curt Cignetti and his coaching staff got their hands on them. I don't think that Indiana is going to be what Alabama was under Nick Saban. I don't think they're going to be a dynasty in that capacity, but I do feel they'll be a lot closer, maybe better than what Clemson was in the mid-2010s under Dabo Swinney, because I hear this question asked a lot. What's the closest thing that we've ever seen to Indiana? I say Clemson. Even though Clemson wasn't as down and out and irrelevant as what Indiana was, Clemson had a little bit of history before they became a national championship contender under Dabo Swinney, but they weren't really viewed as a national brand like how they are today. So when Clemson won their first few national championships, it kind of took us all by surprise because a program like Clemson wasn't really viewed in the same regard as what Alabama and Ohio State were. And that's kind of the closest thing that I've seen to Indiana. And I think that if there is a comparison to what Indiana is going to be under Curt Cignetti in the foreseeable future, it's going to be what Clemson was during their peak under Dabo Swinney. But maybe Indiana is able to sustain their peak longer than how Dabo Swinney was able to sustain Clemson's peak, since unlike Dabo Swinney, we know that Curt Cignetti is as good as anybody when it comes to utilizing the transfer portal. He's an elite player evaluator. And he's just a very good game day coach. Curt Cignetti is one of the few coaches in college football that's just a complete all-around coach. Some coaches in college football are great because they're great recruiters, but they're not as good when it comes to the game day management as what they are recruiting. Prime example, Mario Cristobal, even though I do believe that he improved exponentially last year as a game day coach. Then you got guys like Curt Cignetti that just have it all figured out. Elite recruiters, elite with the X's and O's, elite game day coach, always have you ready to play regardless of how tough of an opponent you may be playing, regardless of how tough your schedule is. You can always count that Indiana, like Ohio State, is going to be a lock for the CFP every year until Curt Cignetti hangs it up and he retires. I don't think that Indiana has to go 16-0 again to win another national championship. I'm not saying that Indiana is incapable of going 16-0. It's just that I feel they set the bar so high that it's going to be hard for them to replicate that, and really anybody to replicate that, because it's hard to even go through the regular season unscathed. It's going to be even harder when we expand to 24 teams, and you're telling me that with a few more additional games, we're going to have a team go 20-0, 19-0. I just don't see that happening, but I can see Indiana winning at least 2-3 more national championships, because if this team won a national championship, they were beating the hell out of Oregon with like 2- and 3-star guys. Can you imagine the monster this program is going to be 3 years down the road from now when they have 4- and 5-star guys all over the place? You mean to tell me that doesn't scare some of you guys? It kind of scares me. I'm glad I'm a Miami fan and we're not in the Big 10. I hope we don't have to go up against Indiana anytime soon if we have any more conference realignment. Indiana's the last team that I want to go up against if I'm anybody in that conference, with the level they're about to be recruiting at, with how much success they've already had, in spite of not having that amount of blue chip talent that they're about to get. it's going to be really scary for anybody that has to play Indiana. Anybody that's sharing the conference with Indiana right now, you need to be very nervous. Because last year, I think may just have been a warning of how much more dominant this program is going to be for at least the next decade. There are a lot of reasons why Texas can win the national championship this year. Obviously, Arch Manning is expected to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He's expected to be the first player drafted in the 2027 NFL draft. And you also added some big-time talent out of the transfer portal. You get Cam Coleman at receiver. You got two very good running backs with Leek Brown, Hollywood Smothers. You return experienced offensive line. You got a lot of studs on defense like Colin Simmons, who, like Arch Manning, could be in the conversation for being the first pick of the 2027 NFL draft. But those aren't the reasons why I'm picking Texas to win it all this year. I'm picking Texas to win a national championship this year, not because they have Arch Manning, not because they have the best roster that money can buy. I'm picking Texas to win the national championship because of the big, shocking decision that Steve Sarkisian made at the beginning of this offseason when he fired his former defensive coordinator, Pete Kwiatkowski, and replaced him with Will Muschamp. This move shocked the entire college football world. Pete Kwiatkowski wasn't a bad defensive coordinator. As a matter of fact, he was very good. Shut down Jeremiah Smith, one of the few defensive coordinators to be able to say that. And he had some pretty good defenses. But in spite of how good his defenses looked on paper, there were a few red flags that you saw last season when Texas gave up 29 on the road to Billy Napier's offense. They gave up 38 in an overtime win to Mississippi State. They let Vandy drop 31 on their head. Then they gave up 37 points to Arkansas late during the season. So those performances defensively were the red flags that really bothered Steve Sarkisian. And I give Steve Sarkisian a lot of credit. Instead of saying, you know, this dude was a finalist for the Jim Broyles Award, I'm not finna get rid of him, Steve Sarkisian said no. Because what if these warning signs end up becoming even worse the following season when I have to win a national championship? Steve Sarkisian has to win a national championship this year because last year was supposed to be the year Texas won it all. Last year was supposed to be the year that Texas was building to when Steve Sarkisian first took the job and he arrived at Austin. So with the amount of pressure that Steve Sarkisian and this program is under going into this season, they couldn't afford to just be okay with good. Pete Kwiatkowski was good, but good isn't what Texas needs to be this year defensively. Texas needs to be great. And Will Muschamp has been defensive coordinator for over 20 years in college football, and he's coached multiple elite defenses. We're talking about coaching the top 10 defense when he first was a defensive coordinator for Nick Saban when he was at LSU and won his first national championship there. Then when he had a top 10 defense when he was Auburn's defensive coordinator. Then eventually leaving Auburn to coach a top 10 eventual national championship winning defense at the University of Texas. And even despite the lack of success that he has had as a head coach at Florida and South Carolina, his defenses there were still pretty good. So if you're Steve Sarkisian, you look at the track record that Will Muschamp has, coaching elite defenses, the familiarity that he has with the SEC, knowing how to attack these offenses, knowing how to consistently perform at a high level on that side of the football, it made a lot of sense to fire Pete Kwiatkowski, who was good, and upgrade him with Will Muschamp, whose ceiling is great. With the talent that Texas has on this side of the football, you give Will Muschamp the opportunity to coach these guys, Texas defense is going to be one of the best in college football this year. You're not going to see them giving up 30 plus to like a Randall School, one of the worst teams in the SEC, like how they did against Mississippi State, Florida, Arkansas. Like some of the worst teams in the SEC last year hung 30 on Texas. And that was even when Texas offense started to hit them groove because Arch Manning started to hit his stride in the middle portion of the season. So Steve Sarkisian fired Pete Kwiatkowski because he saw the warning signs last year. Everybody looks at the statistics and they see Pete Kwiatkowski coach a top 25 defense. But they ignore the games when you allow Billy Napier's offense to hang 29 on you, Mississippi State to put 38 on you, Vandy to drop 31 on you, Arkansas put 37 on you, and they were a two-man operation. The only thing holding Arkansas together last year was Bobby Petrino and Taylor Green, and two people were enough to drop 37 on the defense that's one of the most talented in college football in terms of recruiting and talent metrics. Texas needs a defense that can win championships, not a defense that's good enough like how Pete Kwiatkowski's defense was. Will Muschamp is going to be the reason why Texas wins it all this year. We know the offense is going to be good, but the offense was good at times last year. The offense wasn't the reason why they necessarily lost to Florida. It was because the defense wasn't that good. They let Dallas Wilson damn near go for 200 yards on them. So Texas defense, while it was good under Pete Kwiatkowski, it could have been a lot better considering how much talent is on that side of the football. And Will Muschamp is going to get every single juice that he can squeeze out of the orange on the defensive side of the ball. And also remember that no team has had more success against Steve Sarkisian than what Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp's defense has had. The 3 times Texas has played Georgia, their offense has had no answers for that defense. So if you're Steve Sarkisian, if you can't beat them, pay him to join your staff. Will Muschamp, I believe, if he's not the highest paid assistant coach in college football, he's one of the highest paid assistant coaches in college football. He's definitely up there. So I'm picking Texas to win the national championship this year, to beat the Miami Hurricanes, despite me being a Miami fan, because of how good this offense is going to be and how good this defense is going to be with the addition of Will Muschamp replacing Pete Kwiatkowski as the Longhorns defensive coordinator. I want to talk about 10 breakout players that college football needs to be on the lookout for going into this upcoming season. Starting off with Michigan transfer Jaime Ffrench, who they got from the University of Texas. Now, Jaime Ffrench didn't really do too much his lone season at Texas, but he was one of the best receivers coming out of high school, a guy that I'm very familiar with coming from the city of Jacksonville. And Mandarin High School normally has produced some pretty good collegiate players at the next level. And Michigan hasn't had a receiver this talented as what Jaime Ffrench is in a very long time. And with the wide receivers that Bryce Underwood was throwing to last year, I expect Jaime Ffrench to be an instant upgrade. This should be an instant plug-and-play starter for them. He's had outstanding spring camp according to a lot of Michigan spring camp reports out there. So I expect this to be not only the best receiver on Michigan's team, but to be one of the better wide receivers in the Big 10. Marcus Stokes was a finalist for the Division II Heisman Trophy. Some of you guys are probably going to be like, who the hell is this kid? But he's another guy from the Jacksonville area. He comes from the St. Augustine, Ponte Vedra area, which that area normally produces some pretty good college quarterbacks. Remember Austin Reed, who was going off at Western Kentucky a few years ago? He comes from the St. Augustine, Ponte Vedra area. The St. Augustine, Ponte Vedra area normally produces some pretty solid quarterbacks at the next level. I think that Marcus Stokes is going to be the next one. He was a former 4-star recruit. He got declassified to a 3-star recruit. It's kind of weird how like they just changed the star rankings, but I'm just going to consider him an initial 4-star recruit. He was committed to Florida at one point, but then he was rapping lyrics to a J. Breezy song. He dropped the M-bomb, and he ended up getting his scholarship revoked from Florida, and no other programs really wanted to touch him, so he ends up having to humble himself, go to University of West Florida. He dominates there last year, scored over 40 total touchdowns. He had 30 through the air, 10 on the ground. He right now is in a quarterback competition with Aaron Nolan, but we've yet to see Aaron Nolan be good enough to win a starting job, and he's on his third school now. He couldn't win it at South Carolina. He couldn't win it at Ohio State. I don't think he's going to be able to beat out Marcus Stokes either, because this guy has experience. Sure, it's not at the FBS level, but if this dude was a finalist for the Division II Heisman Trophy, he has to be able to play, and he's a very good athlete, very strong arm. I think that Marcus Stokes is going to win the Memphis starting quarterback job, and he's going to go on to be the best quarterback in the G5, and eventually he'll end up getting a bigger offer at the end of this year to go start for a Power 4 program. And there were already a few Power 4 programs that were interested in getting him out of the transfer portal. Bryce Young is entering his third season at Notre Dame. Now, this is somebody that has NFL bloodlines. His dad was a very good NFL player. And in his first 2 seasons at Notre Dame, he hasn't really done that much, only 3.5 sacks combined. But I believe in his third season, this is really when we're going to see Bryce Young break out. I expect for him to have at least 8-9 sacks. He'll probably have over 10+ tackles for loss. And he should end up being one of the best edge rushers in college football this year. I could see him being a late first-round pick, possibly an early second-round pick. And if things go really well for him, don't be surprised if he ends up catapulting himself in that top 15, top 10 discussion. Bryce Young, he has the athletic tools. He has the size. It's just, can he put it all together? I believe in year 3 at Notre Dame, this is really when we're going to see the best of Bryce Young. Next up, I have USC running back Waymond Jordan. He was one of my favorite transfer portal pickups of the entire offseason in 2025 because Lincoln Riley got him from the JUCO ranks. And when he was in junior college, this dude was an absolute stud. Very good vision. He excels at generating a lot of yards after contact. And despite playing only half the season for USC, he was very impressive. He was averaging 6.5 yards per carry. That means that every 2 times Waymond Jordan carried the rock, he was averaging the first down. He also had 176 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns to go along with that. With him coming back fully healthy, with USC's offensive line improving this offseason, I expect Waymond Jordan to be one of not just the best running backs in the Big 10, but one of the best running backs in all of college football. Lincoln Riley has not only just a very good eye for quarterbacks, but he has a very good eye for running backs. His running backs normally have very good vision. They're very good at the contact. They have very good hands catching out of the backfield. Waymond Jordan is going to be not a Heisman contender, but he's going to be a household name by the end of 2026. Marquise Lightfoot is going to be the next man up to replace Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain at Miami. He was the 34th best recruit coming out of the 2023 recruiting cycle. He was a rotational player for Miami last year. Didn't play a lot of snaps, but when he did get some opportunities, he was pretty productive. 2.5 sacks, had a few tackles for loss. I think that he's beefed up a little bit. He was 230 pounds last year. He kind of looks like he might quietly be at 240 now. Very twitchy, just a freak athlete, the kind of athlete that you expect Mario Cristobal to have on his team, since Mario Cristobal has taken the blueprint that Nick Saban used to build up Alabama, and he's implemented it at Miami. Now it's not just about how big these guys are, but how big and how fast can these guys move? As the old saying goes, mass kicks ass. And I think that Marquise Lightfoot, if there's anybody who's going to be a good replacement for Ruben Bain, it's going to be him. Daniel Hill is the Alabama running back that everybody should be paying attention to, since there were a few games last year when he kind of was the unsung hero for Alabama's offense. He almost single-handedly brought them back and beat Oklahoma the first time they played. Not only does he have very good size, he's 244 pounds, but he is the whole a lot stronger than how Jan Miller did. And he's just an overall better complimentary back than what Jan Miller was. Jan Miller, he was all right at times, but he just didn't have the burst. He just didn't have the acceleration that Daniel Hill does. And Daniel Hill, with how good he is catching the ball out of the backfield, I think he's also a pretty good pass blocker. This is one of the most complete running backs entering college football. And I think that he's going to be a spark plug for Alabama's offense this year. There's a lot of questions about how improved Alabama's ground game is going to be this year. I'm confident this ground game is going to be better because of Daniel Hill going into his second season and this Kalen DeBoer offense, getting more opportunities. I expect this guy to be one of the better running backs in the SEC this year. If you haven't seen Daniel Hill play, go back and watch the first time Alabama played Oklahoma. He came off the bench and this dude started snapping. I was very impressed with just how well he moves despite a guy that's 244 pounds. He catches the ball very well. He moves very good for that size. Bryce Underwood, you knew he was going to be on here sooner rather than later. I felt Bryce Underwood's freshman season was better than what a lot of people give it credit for. Sure, he wasn't lighting the world on fire. That he looked like a $13.5 million quarterback at times. No, but the guy was throwing to Amazon workers. With him throwing to Jaime Ffrench and some other good receivers that Kyle Whittingham has brought along with him out of the transfer portal, having a better offensive coordinator as well, Bryce Underwood is going to go off this year. Bryce Underwood was very underrated in his true freshman season. I don't know what people were expecting. Were you expecting Bryce Underwood to win the Heisman? Like when Bryce Underwood made the decision to flip from LSU to Michigan, I kind of was a little shocked. I was like, I know they're giving you a lot of money. I know that you're from the area, but my brother, when has Michigan ever developed an elite quarterback? When has Michigan ever gave a quarterback elite receivers to throw the football to? I think now with Kyle Whittingham being the head coach, with the staff that he's surrounding Bryce Underwood with, Bryce Underwood is going to be super improved this year, and he should be as good as what he was advertised to be when he was coming out of high school. Like, I don't think that Bryce Underwood was that bad. He played as good as what you possibly could for what the hell he was throwing to, being in a run-first offense with a Looney Tunes head coach. I think the sky's the limit for Bryce Underwood this year. Maybe I'm overrating Bryce Underwood just a tad bit, but I was very impressed with what I saw out of Bryce Underwood in a few games that I watched him, especially with how he played against Texas in that bowl game. Even though he had a few costly interceptions, he was pretty good in that game. I have Ohio State cornerback Devin Sanchez as another breakout player that I don't think college football sees coming. He didn't get a lot of action last season, but I keep seeing a lot of camps circulating from him going one-on-one with Jeremiah Smith in Ohio State spring camp. And this dude was boxing Jeremiah Smith. Like, he was putting those straps on Jeremiah Smith. And it wasn't just a one-off thing. There's been multiple occasions when Devin Sanchez has been matched up with Jeremiah Smith one-on-one during Ohio State spring camp, and he was clamping them up. So if you're clamping up Ohio State's best receiver of all time and Jeremiah Smith in spring camp, I can only imagine how locked down Devin Sanchez is going to be when the regular season rolls around. This could be the best cornerback in the Big 10 by the end of this season. Next up, I have Florida wide receiver Dallas Wilson. Dallas Wilson is the breakout player that nobody in the national media is talking about, that everybody in the national media should be talking about. I know the brother didn't play a lot of games last year, but he had a huge coming out party against Texas last year. You could damn near say that Dallas Wilson single-handedly won Florida that Texas game last year. You talk about somebody that looks like they're built out of a Marvel movie. Dallas Wilson, there is never going to be another Jeremiah Smith, but Dallas Wilson is pretty freaking close to it. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, one of the best receivers coming out of his recruiting class. Great size, great athleticism. This is somebody that, if he stays healthy, not only is he going to be a great player, but he should end up eventually being a top 10 pick in the NFL draft 2 years from now. He has the ability to be one of the best receivers in college football. That's how good this freaking dude is, and it really shocks me that nobody in the national media has put this guy on a breakout players list. Like, I've seen about 5 or 7 breakout players lists, and Dallas Wilson hasn't been on a single one of them. Very shocking. And obviously, we know that Keelon Russell is going to be on here, since Keelon Russell, to me, is the most talented quarterback that has ever walked through Alabama's program. He reminds me of Jaden Daniels with the pinpoint accuracy that he has throwing the deep ball, with what he can do running the football, how dynamic of a runner he is. I expect him to quickly submit himself as one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and he will be a potential finalist for the Heisman Trophy in December. These are 10 breakout players that college football doesn't see coming in 2026. And this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Before you leave on out of here, do me a favor. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content. We're talking all things football 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. So if you can't go a day without getting your football fix in, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcast from, Apple, Spotify. The links are down in the description below. We are trying to crack the top 100 of the Apple Football Podcast charts. Of course, we can't do that without your help. So if you enjoy the content, you want to support the grind, all we ask is that you rate the JT Sports Podcast a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast from. Join the JT Sports Discord. We're trying to get more activity going in the Discord. We're talking all things football, whatever time of the day it is, whether you're waking up 6 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock at night. Go ahead, join the JT Sports Discord. We're talking football any time of the day, whenever. Go ahead, join. The link is also in the description. And lastly, give us a follow at JT Sports _ where you can find us on Instagram, X, and TikTok. We post bonus content. We interact with you guys in the DMs. We answer questions for future episodes. So go ahead, give us a follow at JT Sports _ where you can find us on all social media platforms. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys shortly with another